I went camping in the Appalachian Mountains. I still can't believe what I witnessed. I've spent countless hours in the woods, hunting, fishing, camping. It didn't matter to me. I loved it all. Even as I got older, my love for the woods was always there. In my early 20s, I made it a tradition to camp out in the Appalachians at least once every 2 or 3 months. There were plenty of camping spots within an hour of my house, so every once in a while, I would pick a new spot just to keep things interesting. This trip started out like any other. I found a nice camping spot and had begun setting up my tent when I noticed a wooden structure maybe 100 yards deeper into the woods. I've found it's important to check these kinds of places out before making camp. Abandoned houses out here make perfect spots for homeless camps and drug dens, and I didn't want to run into either after dark. The closer I got, the more rundown this place looked. It appeared to be what was left of a house. I'm no expert, but I would guess it was built in the mid to late 1800s. The whole structure consisted of a door, a few rotting beams, and a handful of old square nails holding the walls together. Beyond the house, I noticed a couple of headstones sticking up through the brush. After a closer look, it seemed to be an old family plot. The headstones were smooth and didn't have any writing, so I couldn't really get any info from them. The whole place made me a little uneasy, but I brushed it off. Satisfied with my check of the area, I returned to finish setting up camp. After setting up, I had some dinner and spent several hours just enjoying the solitude of the woods. As the sun began to set, I hopped into the tent and drifted off to sleep. Around 3 a.m. I woke up to the sound of screaming. My first thought was it had to be some kind of animal because of how loud and piercing they seemed. But the more I listened, the less sure I became. Something sounded uniquely human about it. As I listened, I noticed another sound between the screams. It sounded exactly like a woman crying. Whoever it was couldn't have been far from my tent. I was in a bit of a pickle. On the one hand, it seemed like whoever was out there might need help. But on the other, if it was some crazy woman on drugs, it was in my best interest to be nowhere near her. I decided I'd hike far enough back to get some decent cell service and call the authorities to come take a look. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and began to creep away. Once outside, I could hear a bit better and realized the woman wasn't alone. I could hear the hushed whispers of a conversation. To me it sounded like another woman, but it was hard to tell. I turned and started walking in the opposite direction to try and distance myself from them. I hadn't gotten more than 200 yards from the tent when I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A large dark shadow was moving silently through the woods maybe 50 feet in front of me. I instinctively dropped to the ground and tried my best not to move or make a sound. As the shadow got closer and my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed it was a man. He was very large, at least 6'5", well over 300 pounds. He appeared to be carrying a hammer and had a sickening smile that seemed to envelop most of his face. I was horrified. I laid there and held my breath. For as large as he was, he moved in complete silence. The seconds felt like hours. Eventually he passed by me and continued deeper into the woods. Once the coast was clear, I ran full speed for the car. As I ran, the shrieks I had heard before started up again, but this time even more frantic and blood-curdling. The screams continued all the way back to the car. I had never run so fast in my life. When I got to the car, I locked the doors and phoned the police. They conducted a thorough search of the area but found nothing. I was baffled. They suggested I go home and get some rest and come back in the morning to get my camping equipment. I was more than willing to do that. Even being safe and in my own bed, I couldn't sleep. But when the sun came out, I reluctantly went back to grab my stuff. Thankfully, they sent an officer to escort me. As I packed up the equipment, I noticed the door to the old house had fallen completely off the hinges, and I knew it hadn't been like that the day before. I mentioned this to the officer, and he went to take a closer look. A few minutes went by when I heard the officer shout for me to come over. He asked if I had seen this the first time, pointing to the gravestones. I went white when I noticed 2 new gravestones next to the others. You could tell by the way the soil had been disturbed that these graves were fresh. From there I was taken into the station to talk with investigators and give a full description of the man and the events of that night. They assured me they would update me with any information on the case. I never heard back from them, but I was told by a buddy on the force that several bodies had been discovered and the police were trying to keep it quiet that there was a potential serial killer on the loose. I don't go camping in anymore, and as far as I know, no one has ever been charged for the crimes.